The story I'm about to share is deeply personal. It's a journey that took me from the depths of despair to moments of hope, confusion, and ultimately, a crossroads I never imagined I'd face. The first thing you should know is that life before the accident felt predictable, like clockwork. There was a sense of routine in my marriage with Julia. I loved her deeply, had since the day we met, and for years it seemed she loved me too. But looking back, there were cracks in the foundation, hairline fractures that I was too blind or maybe too trusting to see. Before the accident, I had no reason to believe things were falling apart. Sure, there had been late nights when she stayed out longer than usual, saying work had her tied up, or weekends when she made plans without me. But nothing concrete, nothing that screamed trouble. Until the night I got that call. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., when my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I was already half asleep, the glow of the street lamp casting shadows on the ceiling as I listened to the wind rustle outside. My heart jumped when I saw it was a call from the hospital. I answered immediately, my throat tightening as I listened to the voice on the other end. "Is this Mr. Archer? I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. Your wife, Julia, has been in a car accident. You need to come down right away." Those words hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. I scrambled out of bed, throwing on clothes in a daze. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. The radio was off, but my mind was louder than any static could have been, racing with questions. Was she okay? How bad was it? Was someone else involved? I had no idea that this phone call would mark the start of a new chapter in my life. A chapter filled with secrets I wasn't prepared to uncover. When I got to the hospital, the sterile smell hit me first, that unmistakable scent of antiseptic and cold tiles. They led me to the ICU, where Julia lay in a bed, surrounded by beeping machines and a tangle of 4 tubes. She looked fragile, her face pale and bruised, a bandage wrapped around her head. The doctor approached me, a somber look on his face. "She's stable, but she sustained a head injury, Mr. Archer. It's too early to tell the extent of the damage, but there is some memory loss. We believe she has retrograde amnesia. She doesn't remember anything from the past year." At that moment, I didn't care about memory loss. I was just relieved she was alive. But as the days passed and she began her slow recovery, I realized just how devastating her amnesia would become. Not just for her, but for me. When she woke up, Julia didn't seem to remember the accident or the events leading up to it. The last year of her life was gone, erased as if someone had clicked delete. She didn't remember the arguments we'd had, the nights she didn't come home, or the distance that had grown between us. In her mind, we were still the happy couple from a year ago, and for a brief time, I let myself believe we could go back to that. But there were things she didn't know, things that I didn't know until later. Her memory wasn't the only thing shattered in that crash. Our marriage had broken long before, and soon, the ugly truth would begin to surface. The first few weeks were a haze of hospital visits and rehabilitation sessions. Julia was frustrated with her patchy memory, but determined to heal. I, on the other hand, was playing the role of the doting husband, taking time off work, bringing her flowers, holding her hand as she tried to piece her life back together. The guilt gnawed at me, because even though she couldn't remember, I could feel it. The distance, the secrets she didn't know she was keeping. She couldn't remember the affair, but I didn't know that. Not yet. As her memory slowly returned in fragments, I began to notice small, unsettling signs. At first, it was little things, mentioning names of people I hadn't heard her talk about in months, asking about places she hadn't visited in a while. But then she started talking in her sleep, mumbling names I didn't recognize, having dreams that didn't seem to involve me. One night, as I lay next to her, half asleep, she murmured a name, David. I stiffened, listening, hoping she wouldn't say more. But she did. "David. I'm sorry, don't tell him." I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know who David was, but the way she said his name, with that quiet, guilty tone, made me sick to my stomach. I wanted to wake her up, demand to know what she was talking about, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She didn't remember anything. And that was the hardest part. Was this some ghost from her past? A fling before we met? Or was it more recent? My mind raced through every possibility. Could she have been seeing someone before the accident? Could David be part of the reason she had become so distant? The next morning, I watched her closely, looking for any hint, any sign that she was hiding something. But Julia seemed oblivious, cheerful even, as she went about her morning routine, smiling at me like we were the perfect couple. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee, her hand trembling slightly. I nodded, unable to speak. I was drowning in my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. But then I realized something. Maybe this was a second chance. Maybe this was an opportunity to rebuild what we had lost before the accident. If Julia didn't remember her affair, if she didn't remember David, could I really hold it against her? But as much as I wanted to bury the past, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. In the days that followed, more memories started trickling back to her, and with them, the inevitable truth. And it was only a matter of time before I found the first clue, something small but undeniable, that would unravel everything. The days after Julia's accident were a strange mix of hope and fear. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that wanted to believe we were given a reset button. Maybe this was a chance to rebuild our marriage from the ground up, to start fresh. But as much as I tried to convince myself of that, there was this nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. The memory of her sleep-talking, the name David hanging like a shadow over everything. I didn't say anything to her about it. Not yet. But I was starting to notice more, small things that didn't sit right. When we had dinner together, she'd sometimes look off, as if lost in thought. Other times, she'd catch herself mid-sentence, stopping as if she'd forgotten what she was about to say. At first, I chalked it up to the effects of the accident. The doctors had said her memory would come back in fragments, that it was normal for her to feel disoriented. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something she wasn't telling me. Or maybe something she didn't fully remember yet. One Saturday, about 3 weeks into her recovery, we were having lunch in the backyard. The fall air was crisp, and for a moment everything felt normal. She was laughing at something I'd said, and I found myself smiling, almost forgetting everything that had happened. Almost. But then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I noticed her face change. Just for a second, but enough to make me sit up. She quickly put the phone down, flipping it over so the screen was hidden, and resumed talking, but the moment had passed. I couldn't help but wonder who had messaged her. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, curiosity got the better of me. I reached for her phone, carefully pulling it off the nightstand. I knew I shouldn't. This was crossing a line. But the growing pit in my stomach overpowered my better judgment. As I unlocked it, my heart raced. I wasn't sure what I was even looking for, but I felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to jump. I scrolled through her messages, mostly harmless chats with friends and family, nothing suspicious. But then I saw it, a number without a name, buried deeper in the list, marked by short, cryptic texts. There weren't many, but they stood out. "Can we talk soon? It's been hard without you. I miss us." My blood ran cold. I scrolled up looking for the full context, but there wasn't much. The messages seemed to start just a few weeks before her accident, and they were brief, almost like someone trying to keep things under the radar. There were no long conversations, no emotional confessions, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a casual acquaintance. Suddenly, I was back in that moment, hearing her whisper David's name in her sleep. Could this be him? Was he the person on the other end of these messages? I locked the phone and put it back on the nightstand, my hands trembling. The room felt suffocating, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I lay back down next to her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. The woman lying beside me, the woman I was supposed to be rebuilding my life with, had been keeping secrets. Even if she didn't remember them now, I did. The next day, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every word, every smile, felt loaded with the knowledge of what I'd found. She seemed blissfully unaware, going about her day like nothing had changed. But for me, the ground beneath us had shifted. I knew I had to find out more. I couldn't just sit there, pretending everything was fine when there was this gaping hole in our marriage. So I started watching her more closely, looking for any signs that she might remember, that she might be slipping back into old habits. But Julia, to her credit, didn't give me much to work with. If she was hiding something, she was doing a damn good job of it. A few days later, I decided to check her phone again. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. This time, the messages were gone. The thread with the unnamed number had been deleted, wiped clean like it had never existed. My heart sank. Why would she delete those messages? Was it a coincidence? Or had she started remembering things from before the accident? The idea made me feel sick. If she remembered, why wouldn't she tell me? I thought about confronting her right then and there, but something held me back. I wasn't ready for the fallout. Not yet. I needed more proof. One evening, as she was in the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about the next step. I couldn't keep doing this. Living in limbo, half trusting her while the other half of me was consumed by doubt. I needed answers. That's when I remembered her old tablet. It had been sitting in the drawer of her nightstand for months, untouched. Julia mostly used her phone for everything, so the tablet had fallen out of use. But maybe, just maybe, it still held something, some clue that hadn't been erased. I opened the drawer, pulling out the device, and powered it on. After a few seconds, the familiar home screen lit up. I opened her messages, my heart pounding in my chest. There, at the top, was a conversation from months ago, before the accident. As I scrolled through it, the color drained from my face. It was David. The messages started out innocent enough, like colleagues talking about work. But as I kept scrolling, they became more personal, more intimate. There were hints of late-night meetings, mentions of hotel rooms, and then, finally, a message that confirmed everything I'd feared. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I stared at the screen, numb. It was real. There had been someone else, and she had been seeing him for God knows how long. I felt the bile rise in my throat, the room spinning around me. I had the proof now. I had what I needed to confront her. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The sound of the shower turning off snapped me out of my daze. I quickly shut the tablet and shoved it back in the drawer, my heart racing as she stepped into the bedroom. "Everything okay?" she asked, toweling off her hair, oblivious to the storm that was raging inside me. I nodded, forcing a smile. But everything was far from okay. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, my mind looping back to the messages, to the name David. My hands ached from clenching the sheets, and my thoughts twisted in circles. How much did she remember? Did she know what she had done and was hiding it from me? Or was she truly oblivious, living in some memoryless bubble where her betrayal didn't exist? Every part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers. But there was another part, a quieter voice in the back of my mind, telling me to wait. What if she didn't remember? What if, in bringing it all up, I tore open wounds that she couldn't handle yet? I couldn't just accuse her without knowing the full truth. But how much longer could I live like this? Knowing the woman I loved had betrayed me, and not knowing if she was still hiding something. The days following my discovery felt surreal, like I was living in two different realities. One part of me clung to the Julia I had married, the woman who was slowly recovering, who smiled at me like she didn't have a care in the world. But the other part, the darker part, was consumed by the truth I had uncovered on that tablet. Julia had been seeing someone else, David. Even though she didn't seem to remember the affair, the knowledge sat between us like a ghost, haunting every interaction, every conversation. I tried to act normal, to pretend that nothing had changed, but I could feel myself slipping. Every time she touched me, every time she smiled at me, I wondered, was she thinking about him? Did she remember more than she was letting on? I spent a lot of time in my office those days trying to distance myself to make sense of what was happening. I'd sit at my desk for hours, staring at the wall, replaying our life over and over again in my mind. How'd I missed it? The late nights, the unexplained absences. Of course they weren't innocent. I had been a fool, too trusting to see what was right in front of me. But now that I knew, the question became, what the hell was I supposed to do with this information? A week after finding the messages, I was standing in the kitchen, making coffee when Julia walked in, still in her pajamas. She looked soft, vulnerable, her hair a little messy from sleep. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. It was hard to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one who had been sneaking around behind my back. She looked so innocent. "Morning," she said, yawning as she reached for a mug. "Morning," I muttered, trying to keep my tone even. She glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I froze, my hand tightening around the coffee pot. Was everything okay? That was the million-dollar question. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that no, nothing was okay, that I knew what she had done. But instead, I just nodded. "Yeah, just work stress." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she gave me a small smile, the kind that used to melt my heart, and leaned in to kiss me on the cheek. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. Her words sent a jolt of confusion through me. How could she say that? How could she stand there, so calm, so affectionate, when she had been lying to me for God knows how long? It made me sick, but I forced a smile, trying to keep the cracks from showing. But the cracks were there. They were always there. That night, as we lay in bed, Julia curled up beside me like she always did, resting her head on my chest. It felt like a scene from a life we used to have, a life before the affair, before the accident, before everything had fallen apart. Her body was warm against mine, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax, to forget the mess we were in. But then she whispered something that sent ice through my veins. "I've been having these dreams lately," she murmured, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. My body tensed immediately. "What kind of dreams?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She hesitated, shifting slightly against me. "I don't know. It's hard to explain. They feel real like memories, but they're all mixed up. Sometimes I see places I don't recognize, people I don't know. And other times," she trailed off, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing circles on my chest. "Other times?" I prompted, my heart pounding in my chest. She sighed. "There's this man. I don't know who he is, but he feels familiar. I can't see his face clearly, but I always feel something when I dream about him. Something intense." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't need her to say more. I knew who the man in her dreams was. David. I swallowed hard, fighting the rising wave of panic. "Do you remember anything else about him?" She shook her head. "No, it's all so fuzzy. But the dreams keep coming back, and every time, it feels like I'm forgetting something important." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to push her, to make her remember, to force her to confront the truth. But another part, the part that still loved her, despite everything, wanted to protect her from it. I couldn't tell her, not like this, not while she was still recovering. So instead, I just held her close, my heart aching as I whispered, "It's okay. Don't worry about it." But it wasn't okay. Not even close. In the days that followed, Julia's dreams seemed to intensify. She started waking up in the middle of the night, restless and agitated, her mind clouded by fragments of memories she couldn't piece together. And every time she mentioned the man from her dreams, I felt like I was being ripped apart, torn between wanting her to remember and dreading what would happen if she did. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair in silence. I watched her from the bed, my thoughts spinning. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed answers. "Julia," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the stillness of the room. She turned to me, her expression soft but questioning. "Yeah, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." My heart pounded as I gathered the courage to continue. "Before the accident, were you happy? With us, I mean?" Her brow furrowed slightly, and she sat down on the edge of the bed, facing me. "Of course I was," she said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Why would you ask that?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I don't know. It's just we've been through a lot, and sometimes I wonder if things were different before. If maybe you weren't as happy as you thought." She looked down at her hands, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of the blanket. I don't know," she admitted softly. "I don't remember everything from that time, but there are these feelings, these gaps. Like something was missing, but I can't put my finger on it." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Something was missing. I knew that now, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. Instead, I just nodded, my throat tight. I just want you to know that whatever it was, we can work through it. I'm here. For you. She gave me a sad smile, reaching out to take my hand. I know, and I'm grateful for that. I don't know what I'd do without you. Her words should have comforted me, but they only made the ache in my chest worse. Because deep down, I knew that I wasn't the only one she was thinking about. It was 2 days later when everything came crashing down. I was in the garage organizing some old boxes, trying to keep myself busy and distracted. Julia was inside, resting after a long day of physical therapy. I had been going through a box of old photo albums when I came across something I hadn't seen in months, an old scrapbook Julia had made a few years back. It was filled with memories of us, our trips, birthdays, little moments we'd shared over the years. As I flipped through the pages, I felt a pang of nostalgia, a reminder of the life we used to have before everything had changed. But then, at the back of the scrapbook, I found something I wasn't expecting, a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. Curious, I pulled it out and opened it. It was a receipt from a hotel. The date on it was just a few weeks before the accident. And the name on the reservation? David. My heart dropped. This wasn't just a vague suspicion anymore. This was proof. Proof that Julia had been seeing him, sneaking off to meet him in secret, just weeks before her life. And our marriage was turned upside down by that accident. I stood there, frozen, the receipt crumpled in my hand, my mind racing. I had thought I could wait, that I could let her memory come back on its own. But now, standing in that garage with the proof of her betrayal in my hand, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her, and I had no idea what would happen next. When I found that receipt, everything came crashing down. It felt like the ground beneath my feet had been ripped away, and I was left dangling in midair, unsure of where or how I would land. I held that crumpled piece of paper in my hand, staring at it as if it were some kind of sick joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. Julia had been meeting him, David, just weeks before the accident. The hotel was local, a place not far from where we lived, which made it all the more gut-wrenching. They hadn't even tried to hide it, not really. How could she look me in the eye and pretend everything was fine when she was doing this behind my back? I thought about all the times she'd been late, the nights she claimed she was working or out with friends. All of it lined up now like puzzle pieces clicking into place. And there, standing in the garage with that damn receipt in my hand, I couldn't deny it any longer. She'd betrayed me, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. I stuffed the receipt into my pocket, my hands trembling with rage. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't just sit on this anymore. I had to confront her, had to get the truth out of her, even if it tore both of us apart in the process. I walked back inside, my mind a storm of emotions, anger, heartbreak, confusion. Julia was sitting on the couch, watching TV, her face relaxed, as if she didn't have a care in the world. It felt surreal, seeing her like that, knowing what I knew. She glanced up at me as I entered the room, smiling softly. "Hey, you find anything interesting in the garage?" she asked casually, completely unaware of the emotional bomb about to drop. I stared at her for a moment, trying to keep my composure, trying to keep the rage from bubbling to the surface. But I couldn't. Not this time. "Actually, yeah," I said, my voice tight. "I found something very interesting." Her smile faltered, and she sat up straighter, sensing the tension in my voice. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone cautious. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt, holding it up between my fingers. "This," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Care to explain this, Julia?" Her eyes widened when she saw the paper, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Panic, fear. But then she quickly masked it, her expression shifting to one of confusion. I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "What is that?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she really going to play dumb? Did she think I was that naive? "It's a hotel receipt," I snapped, tossing it onto the coffee table in front of her. "From just a few weeks before your accident. And the name on the reservation is David. David Julia. Who the hell is he?" Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she just stared at the receipt as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she looked up at me, her eyes wide, her breath coming in short. shallow gasps. I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. Bullshit, I shouted, my anger finally breaking free. Don't lie to me, Julia. I found the messages on your phone. I know you were seeing him. How long has this been going on? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back? She flinched at my words, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there, shaking her head, her hands trembling in her lap. Please, she whispered. I don't remember. I don't know who David is. I let out a bitter laugh, pacing in front of her, my hands clenched into fists. You expect me to believe that? After everything I've found? After everything you've done? I'm telling the truth, she cried, her voice breaking. I don't remember. I don't know what happened before the accident. I don't know who he is, I swear. For a moment, I almost believed her. The look on her face was one of pure confusion, like she was just as lost as I was. But then I remembered the messages. The hotel. This wasn't some random mistake. This wasn't something she could just forget. She had been meeting him, lying to me, cheating on me, and whether she remembered it or not didn't change the fact that it had happened. I don't care if you remember or not, I said coldly, my voice shaking with fury. You betrayed me, Julia. You lied to me. You were seeing someone else, and you didn't have the decency to tell me the truth. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. I'm sorry, she whispered through her tears. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know. Her words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had destroyed. But seeing her like that, so broken, so vulnerable, it made the anger harder to hold on to. I sank down onto the couch across from her, my head in my hands, trying to catch my breath. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control, like the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I was free falling into some abyss I didn't know how to escape. I thought we were happy, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I thought we had something real. How could you do this? How could you just throw it all away? She lifted her head, her tear-streaked face looking at me with such pain, such regret, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what happened or why. I don't remember him. I don't remember what we had. All I remember is us before everything went wrong. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. The Julia sitting in front of me, this version of her who had forgotten an entire year of her life, was still the woman I had fallen in love with. She didn't remember the affair. She didn't remember David. But that didn't mean she was innocent. It just meant she was trapped in some limbo, some half-life where she didn't have to face the consequences of what she'd done. But I had to face them. I had to decide what came next. That night, after the confrontation, we slept in separate rooms. I couldn't bear to be near her, couldn't stand the thought of lying next to her, pretending like everything was okay. It wasn't. Our marriage was broken, shattered by secrets and lies, and I didn't know how to fix it. The next morning, Julia didn't say much. She looked tired, worn out, her eyes puffy from crying all night. We moved around each other like strangers, the tension in the house thick enough to choke on. I couldn't shake the image of her with him, in that hotel room, laughing, touching, kissing. I felt sick. Later that afternoon, I went for a drive. I couldn't be in that house anymore, couldn't stand the silence that screamed louder than any argument we could have had. I needed space, needed to clear my head. I drove for hours, my thoughts swirling, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. At one point, I pulled over to the side of the road, parked by an overlook with a view of the ocean. I sat there, staring at the water, my mind going numb. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Part of me wanted to leave, to pack up and walk away, to let her deal with the consequences of her actions. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, the part that still loved her, couldn't let go. Could I forgive her? Could we ever rebuild after this? I didn't know the answer, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending that I did. When I got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Julia wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, and when I called out for her, there was no answer. My heart skipped a beat, a sudden fear gripping me as I made my way upstairs. The bedroom door was closed. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, my breath catching in my throat as I stepped inside. Julia was sitting on the bed, a suitcase open in front of her hands shaking as she folded clothes into it. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red and swollen, her expression filled with a sadness so deep it made my chest ache. "I think I should go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think maybe you need time." And I do too. I stood there, frozen, watching as she packed her things. Part of me wanted to stop her, to tell her that we could figure this out together, that I wasn't ready to give up on us. But another part, the part that was still so raw, so hurt, knew that maybe this was what we needed. Space. Distance. Time to figure out what the hell came next. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah," I whispered. "Maybe that's a good idea." She didn't say anything else. She just kept packing, her movements slow and deliberate. Like every item she put into that suitcase was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Watching Julia pack her suitcase felt like a slow, excruciating death. Every shirt she folded, every piece of clothing she tucked away was another reminder of how far we'd fallen. I had once thought we'd never be in this place, this space where we were no longer us. And yet, there she was, preparing to leave the life we'd built together, leaving me in the rubble of what was left. Neither of us spoke as she zipped up the suitcase, the sound of the zipper cutting through the heavy silence. I stood by the door, my back pressed against the frame, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Julia's eyes were swollen, her face pale and drawn, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the weight of everything she carried. She was broken. We both were. "I don't want to leave like this," she finally whispered, her voice trembling as she stood up, looking at me. I don't know what else to do, and I don't want to hurt you anymore." The part of me that still loved her, that had loved her since the beginning, wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her we could figure it out, that this wasn't the end, that we could rebuild from the wreckage. But the other part of me, the part that had been crushed by her betrayal, couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there, helpless, as the woman I loved walked out the door. "I need time," I said quietly, my words feeling foreign, as if they were coming from someone else. "We both do." She nodded slowly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't remember what happened. All of it. I don't know what I did, but I know I hurt you. And I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes, her hands shaking. She looked like she was falling apart right in front of me, and it took everything in me not to reach out to her. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the pain was still so raw, so close to the surface. "I don't know what to do either," I admitted, my voice rough, full of the anger I had been holding back. "I don't know how to move forward from this." Her eyes met mine, wide and vulnerable. And for a moment, the woman I knew, the woman I had loved so deeply, was there again. It was as if we were back in the early days, before all the lies, before all the secrets. But then the weight of the betrayal crashed down around us again, and the moment was gone. "I'll stay at my sister's," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just for a little while, until we figure out what comes next." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy, and all I could do was watch her as she grabbed her suitcase and walked out the door. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the house fell into a suffocating silence. I was alone, really alone, and for the first time in years, the weight of that hit me hard. The days that followed blurred together. Julia was gone, and the house felt emptier than it ever had before. I'd find myself wandering from room to room, sitting in silence, wondering how we had ended up here. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house was haunted by memories of her, of us. And every memory was tainted by the knowledge of what I now knew. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into chores, into mindless tasks that kept my hands occupied but did nothing to quiet the storm raging inside my head. But it wasn't enough. The questions, the doubt, the anger, they were always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for a quiet moment to creep back in. And then there was David. His name had become like a curse in my mind, a constant, gnawing reminder of the betrayal I couldn't escape. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about their messages, about the hotel receipt, about all the lies Julia had told. And the worst part was I still didn't know the full truth. I started searching. It felt like I needed to find answers, to piece together what had happened before the accident. I couldn't confront Julia again. Not yet, but I needed to know. I went through her things, her emails, her phone logs, anything that might give me some clue about the relationship she had with this man. It felt wrong, invasive, but I was desperate. I found little pieces here and there. More cryptic messages in her email, a few random mentions of David from months back, mostly innocent, but now charged with a weight I couldn't ignore. It became clear that their relationship hadn't been a fleeting thing. It had been building for months, maybe even longer. I became obsessed with trying to figure out when it started. How long had I been living in ignorance, while she carried on with someone else? It consumed me, gnawing at my every waking thought. I started to hate her for it. Hate her for turning me into this paranoid, broken version of myself. One evening, about a week after she left, I was sitting in the living room, nursing a drink I didn't really want. The house was quiet, too quiet. The TV was off, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I was thinking about Julia again, about everything that had happened, when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a message from Julia. "Can we talk?" I stared at the words on the screen, my heart racing. For a long moment, I didn't reply. I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk. But then, after what felt like forever, I typed out a response. "Sure. When?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Tonight? I can come over in an hour." My fingers hovered over the screen, my mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Part of me wanted to say no, to shut her out and let her deal with the consequences of her actions on her own. But another part of me, maybe the part that still loved her despite everything, needed to hear what she had to say. "Okay," I typed, my hands shaking slightly as I hit send. An hour later, I heard the sound of her car pulling up in the driveway. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood by the window, watching her step out, her figure small and hesitant as she made her way up to the front door. She looked nervous, uncertain, and, as much as I hated to admit it, she still had that same effect on me, the effect she'd always had, even after everything that had happened. I opened the door before she could knock, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other in silence. The last time we'd spoken, she had been packing her things, leaving our life behind. Now she was back, but nothing about this felt like a reunion. "Hi," she said quietly, her voice tentative. "Hi," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She walked into the living room, and I followed, my nerves on edge as we sat down on opposite ends of the couch. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy in the room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Julia sat there, wringing her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. I could see the anxiety written all over her face, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know where to start. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've been trying to remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ever since you showed me that receipt, I've been trying so hard to remember everything, but it's still all a blur." I didn't respond, just sat there, watching her as she struggled to find the words. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm so sorry, I am. But I don't remember him. Not really. I don't remember what happened between us. And it's killing me because I can't fix something I don't even understand." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that the woman sitting in front of me was as lost as I was, that she didn't know how things had gone so wrong. But another part of me, the part that had seen the messages, the receipts, couldn't let go of the fact that she had been hiding things for months, maybe longer. "I just need to know the truth," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to know what happened, who he is, why you did it." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could tell you," she whispered, "but I don't remember. I swear I don't. All I know is that I love you, and I want to make this right. I want us to have a chance." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt my anger flare up again, hot and uncontrollable. How the hell are we supposed to move forward if you can't even remember what you did? I snapped, my voice rising. How am I supposed to trust you again? You can't just erase what happened because you don't remember it. Julia flinched at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm not asking you to forget, she sobbed. I'm just asking for a chance. Please. I don't want to lose you. Her plea hung in the air, and for a moment, I was torn between my anger and the love that still lingered beneath it. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers she couldn't give me. But I also wanted to believe her, to believe that there was still something left between us worth fighting for. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can keep living like this, with all these unanswered questions. I'll do anything, she whispered, her voice raw with desperation. Anything to make this right. I sat there, feeling completely torn apart. Julia's words lingered in the air, her desperate plea to make things right stabbing at the part of me that still wanted to hold on to the love we had shared. But then there was the other part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, by the lies she had kept hidden. That part was screaming at me to be strong, to protect myself from the pain of trying to fix something that might already be broken beyond repair. I don't know if I can trust you again, I whispered, my voice barely steady. I could feel the weight of my words hanging between us, like a wall that I wasn't sure we could ever break through. How can we move forward if I can't even trust you? Her tears fell harder now, her shoulders trembling as she tried to speak. I know, she sobbed, choking on the words. I know I've ruined everything. But please, please don't shut me out. I love you, and I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I'll do whatever it takes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman sitting in front of me, the woman I had built my life with, the woman I had once trusted with every part of myself, was still the same person, that we could somehow find a way to piece ourselves back together. But doubt clung to me like a heavy fog, clouding every thought, every decision. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. If you were unhappy, if something was missing, why didn't you talk to me? Why did you go to someone else? Julia buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I don't know, she cried. I was confused. I was lost. But I didn't stop loving you. I swear, I didn't stop loving you. Those words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to believe them, but the betrayal loomed too large, too sharp. She had loved me, and yet she had still betrayed me. How was I supposed to reconcile that? We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, both of us lost in the weight of everything unsaid. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret, the guilt that seemed to consume her. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about him, about David, about how she had shared something with him that she had kept hidden from me. The fact that she couldn't remember it didn't erase the reality of what had happened. You need to tell me about him, I finally said, my voice strained. About David. I can't move forward unless I know the truth. Julia looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I don't remember everything, she whispered. I swear I don't. But I know he was someone from work. It wasn't serious. It wasn't love. I don't even know why it happened. Her words hit me like a hammer. It wasn't serious? That's what she was saying? But it had been serious enough to destroy our marriage. Serious enough to make her lie to me, to sneak around behind my back. I wanted to scream, to tell her how much it had broken me, how much I had lost because of it. But instead, I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I'll do anything to fix this, she said again, her voice trembling. If you need space, I'll give you space. If you need time, I'll wait. I just need you to know that I love you, and I'm not giving up on us. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in days, I felt something inside me soften, just a little. There was a part of me that wanted to believe her, that wanted to fight for us, for what we had built. But there was also a part of me that was so tired of the lies, the betrayal, the constant doubt. I don't know what I need, I finally admitted, my voice hoarse. I don't know if I can move past this. Julia reached out then, her fingers brushing against mine. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the first real connection we'd had in months. Her touch was tentative, almost fragile, as if she was afraid I might pull away. And maybe that's what scared me the most, that I didn't pull away. The days that followed were a strange mix of silence and tension. Julia stayed at her sister's, giving me the space I had asked for. But every moment without her felt like another reminder of the emptiness that had settled between us. The house, once filled with our shared life, now felt like a hollow shell. Every corner held memories of her, of us, but they were tainted now, colored by the knowledge of what had been hidden. I spent my time in limbo, trapped between wanting to believe we could rebuild and knowing that something had irreparably changed. I'd catch myself staring at my phone, half hoping for a message from her, half dreading what she might say. I didn't know if I wanted her to fight for us or if I just needed her to let go. Then, one evening, as I sat in the living room with a drink in hand, staring blankly at the TV, I heard my phone buzz. It was a text from Julia. "Can I see you tonight?" I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I was ready. But then again, would I ever be? After everything that had happened, was there any right time to confront the mess we had become? Okay, I finally typed, "Come over." When Julia arrived, the tension between us was palpable. We sat across from each other on the couch, the same spot where we had had that painful conversation days earlier. But this time, there was something different, something quieter, more resigned, as if we both knew that whatever happened next would either make or break us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice soft but steady. "And I know that I've hurt you. I know that what I did is unforgivable. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. "I've been trying to remember," she continued, her voice wavering. "But it's like there are these huge gaps in my memory. I don't remember why I started seeing him. I don't remember what I was feeling back then. I wish I could tell you. I wish I could explain why I did what I did, but I can't." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The uncertainty, the lack of closure, it was like a wound that refused to heal. But at the same time, I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret. And maybe that was enough. Maybe the fact that she was willing to fight for us, to own up to what she had done, was something I could hold on to. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget what happened." Julia's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I know, and I don't expect you to, but I'm asking for a chance to try." For a long moment, we just sat there, the weight of everything we had been through hanging between us. I could feel the anger still simmering beneath the surface, the pain of her betrayal still sharp and raw. But beneath that, there was something else, something that still connected us, something that hadn't been completely destroyed by the lies and the secrets. "I don't know if I'm ready," I finally said, my voice shaking. "But I don't want to give up." "Not yet." Julia let out a shaky breath, her eyes wide with relief. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of hope in her expression. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. "I'll prove to you that I can be the woman you fell in love with, the woman you trusted." I didn't know if I believed her. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust her again. But in that moment, sitting across from her, I realized something important. I wasn't ready to let go either. The weeks that followed were strange. We didn't fall back into old habits or routines, and we didn't pretend that everything was magically fixed. In fact, most days felt like we were walking on eggshells, careful not to trigger the landmines of pain that still lay between us. But there was a kind of tentative hope in the air, a fragile understanding that maybe, just maybe, we could try to rebuild. Julia moved back into the house, but it didn't feel the same. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there before, a kind of unspoken barrier that neither of us knew how to break. We tried to talk, to be honest with each other about what we were feeling, but it was hard. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same question. How could we move forward when the past was still so unresolved? It wasn't easy. Some days I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers she couldn't give me. Other days, I found myself missing her, missing us the way we used to be before everything had fallen apart. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the doubt, the constant fear that she might still be hiding something from me. And then one night, everything changed. The slow rebuilding of our relationship felt fragile, like trying to glue together the shattered pieces of a vase that could never be quite the same. Julia had moved back in, and we were trying, both of us. But the truth was, no matter how much effort we put in, the wounds were still fresh, the scars too deep. Some nights, things felt almost normal again. We'd have dinner together, talk about our day, and even share a laugh or two. But other nights, the silence between us was suffocating, thick with the weight of all the things left unsaid. There was always that invisible barrier, the lingering doubt, the unanswered questions. I'd catch myself staring at her across the table, wondering if she was really here with me, or if she was thinking about him. About David. I hadn't said his name in weeks. It felt like a forbidden word, one that had the power to unravel everything if spoken aloud. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, about what he had meant to her, about what he still represented in the cracks of our marriage. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV in silence, Julia leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, one that used to feel so natural. But now it felt different, like there was a part of her still holding back, still unsure if she belonged there. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. "Maybe we should talk to someone, like a therapist." The word hung in the air between us. It wasn't the first time she had suggested it, but I had always brushed it off. I didn't want to sit in front of some stranger, bearing all of our deepest wounds for them to analyze. But as I sat there, feeling the distance between us, I wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe we couldn't fix this on our own. "I don't know," I muttered, staring at the TV, but not really watching it. "Do you really think it would help?" Julia shifted beside me, sitting up a little straighter. "I think we need help," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "We're not going to get through this if we keep pretending like we can just move on. We need to face it. All of it." Her words stung, but they were the truth. I knew that. But facing it, facing everything, meant opening wounds that I wasn't sure I was ready to revisit. It meant confronting the affair head-on, asking questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. But without that, what were we really doing? Just papering over the cracks, hoping they wouldn't split wide open again? "Maybe," I finally said, my voice strained. "Maybe we should." Julia looked relieved, like she had been holding her breath, waiting for me to come around. She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We can figure it out together," she said, "one step at a time." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that therapy could somehow fix the mess we had made, that we could rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But deep down, I wasn't sure. Part of me was still angry, still hurt, still haunted by the image of her with him. And no amount of therapy could erase that. A few days later, we had our first session with the therapist. Her name was Dr. Bennett, and she was calm, professional, with a soft voice that made it easy to talk. Julia seemed nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt as we sat on the couch in Dr. Bennett's office. I could feel the tension radiating off her, and it mirrored my own unease. "I know this is hard," Dr. Bennett began, her voice gentle but firm. "But the first step to healing is being honest with each other. You've both been through a lot, and rebuilding trust takes time. It's important that you both feel heard, that your feelings are acknowledged." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. Julia glanced at me, her eyes full of uncertainty, as if she was waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't know where to start. How could I explain everything I was feeling? The anger, the betrayal, the confusion. How could I make her understand that every time I looked at her, I saw the ghost of him standing between us? Dr. Bennett turned to me, her eyes kind but probing. "Gavin, would you like to share how you've been feeling since the affair came to light?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The word affair felt like a punch to the gut, even now after all this time. I hadn't said it out loud, hadn't let it become real in that way. But here we were, facing it head-on. "I feel betrayed," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I feel like the person I trusted most in the world lied to me. I don't know how to move forward when I can't even look at her without thinking about what happened." Julia flinched at my words, her eyes filling with tears. I know I hurt you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I destroyed your trust, and I hate myself for it. But I don't know how to fix it. I don't remember all the details, and that makes it even harder. Dr. Bennett nodded, her gaze shifting between us. It's understandable that you both feel stuck. Julia, it's difficult for you because you don't have a clear memory of the affair. And Gavin, it's hard for you to trust again when the truth feels incomplete. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Incomplete is an understatement. I don't even know why it started. Was I not enough for you, Julia? Was there something missing? Her tears spilled over then, her hands trembling as she wiped at her cheeks. No, she said, her voice shaking. It wasn't about you. It was never about you. I was lost, and I made a horrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you. I swear I never stopped. Her words felt like salt in an open wound. How could she say she had never stopped loving me when she had been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, betraying me with him? I don't know how to believe that, I said quietly, my heart aching. How can you love someone and do something like that? Dr. Bennett intervened then, her voice calm but firm. Affairs are complicated. They're rarely about love or lack of love. Often, they're about something else entirely, something internal. Julia, do you have any sense of what was happening in your life at that time? What might have led to the affair? Julia looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. I was unhappy, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Not with you, but with myself. I felt disconnected, like I was drifting. And then David, he was just there. He gave me attention, made me feel wanted, and I got caught up in it. But it didn't mean anything, not really. It wasn't real. My chest tightened at the mention of his name. David. There it was again, that same ugly reminder of everything that had been taken from me. It felt real enough to destroy us, I said bitterly. Julia's face crumpled, her tears falling harder now. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. Dr. Bennett gave us a moment, letting the raw emotion settle between us before speaking again. Gavin, it's important to acknowledge your feelings, but it's also important to recognize that Julia is taking responsibility for her actions. She's expressing remorse and a desire to make amends. Rebuilding trust takes time, but it's possible if both of you are willing to work through the pain. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that we could get through this, that we could somehow claw our way back to each other. But as I sat there, listening to Julia's sobs, I wasn't sure. The pain was still so sharp, so overwhelming. How could I ever trust her again? I don't know if I can do this, I finally admitted, my voice trembling. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Julia reached for my hand then, her fingers trembling as they curled around mine. We can, she whispered. We can do this together. Please, Gavin, don't give up on us. The weeks after therapy were a blur of emotions. We kept going back, session after session, digging deeper into the wreckage of our marriage, trying to find something worth salvaging. Some days, it felt like we were making progress. Julia opened up more about the affair, about how lost she had felt, how she had fallen into something she couldn't control. And I, in turn, tried to express the depth of my hurt, my anger, my sense of betrayal. But no matter how much progress we made, the doubt was always there, lurking in the background. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, that somehow we were only delaying the inevitable. Then one night it happened. We were lying in bed, both of us silent, the darkness of the room pressing in around us. I could hear Julia's breathing beside me, slow and steady, and I knew she was asleep. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was too restless, too full of the weight of everything we had been through. And that's when it happened. Julia stirred beside me, shifting in her sleep, and then she spoke, softly, barely above a whisper, but clear enough for me to hear. David. The name sliced through the darkness like a blade, cutting deep into my heart. David, no. Her voice was soft, full of pain, and my blood ran cold. I sat up, staring at her in disbelief. Was she dreaming about him? After everything we had been through, after all the therapy, the tears, the promises, was he still in her head? I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. I got out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. I couldn't do this. I couldn't live like this, knowing that he was still there, still a part of her. Even if she didn't remember him fully, even if she claimed he meant nothing, he was still there. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, not caring where I was going, only knowing that I needed to get out, to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of everything. As I stood in the doorway, looking back at her sleeping form, I realized something painful, something undeniable. Maybe some wounds never fully heal. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Julia's voice still echoed in my head. David, no. The sound of his name slipping from her lips in her sleep like a ghost that refused to leave. It didn't matter how many therapy sessions we'd had, how many apologies she'd given. He was still there, lingering in the dark corners of her mind, haunting us both. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. But the further I drove, the heavier the weight in my chest became. My thoughts swirled in chaotic circles. Pain, anger, confusion, until it all blurred together into one unbearable knot of emotion. I pulled over into a quiet parking lot, the car idling as I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the crushing weight. I wanted to scream, to yell at the universe for putting me in this position, for making me feel so helpless. But instead, all I felt was emptiness, as if everything had been hollowed out inside me, leaving only the sharp edges of betrayal and heartbreak. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved, the woman I had shared my life with, become a stranger I could no longer trust? The truth was, no matter how much I wanted to believe we could rebuild, no matter how much I still loved her, I couldn't escape the reality of what had happened. Julia's betrayal had cut too deep, and every day since the accident, I had been living with the shadow of her affair looming over me. Every touch, every kiss, every moment we shared felt tainted, like a stain that couldn't be washed away. And now, after everything, she was still dreaming about him. I couldn't go back to pretending everything was okay. I couldn't keep lying to myself, hoping that time would somehow heal the wounds that were still festering inside me. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the empty parking lot, my mind numb. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this, caught between the love I still felt for Julia and the betrayal I couldn't forget. When I finally drove back home, the house was dark and quiet. I parked the car in the driveway, sitting there for a moment, gathering the strength to go inside. The front door loomed in front of me like a threshold I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Part of me wanted to turn around, to drive away and never come back, to leave everything behind and start over somewhere far away from this pain. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not yet. I stepped inside, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weight. Julia was still asleep when I returned to the bedroom, her body curled up under the blankets, her face soft and peaceful in the dim light. I stood there for a moment, watching her, torn between the love I still felt and the anger that simmered just beneath the surface. I couldn't wake her. I couldn't bring myself to start another fight, to confront her again. Not tonight. I was too exhausted, too drained to keep reliving the same nightmare over and over. So, I grabbed a pillow and headed for the couch. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Julia moving around in the kitchen. I had barely slept, my mind still buzzing from the events of the night before. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the emotional toll of everything we had been through. I sat up on the couch, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the haze of exhaustion. When I walked into the kitchen, Julia turned to look at me, her eyes widening with concern. "You slept on the couch?" she asked softly, her voice laced with worry. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. I could see the questions in her eyes, the unspoken fear that something was wrong. And she was right. Something was wrong. But I didn't know how to tell her, didn't know how to explain the storm of emotions raging inside me. "Gavin, what's going on?" she asked, stepping closer, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. "Talk to me." I pulled away, the weight of her touch too much to bear. "You were dreaming last night," I said, my voice rough. "You said his name." Her face paled, her eyes widening in shock. "What?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "You said his name? David. In your sleep." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia stood there, frozen, her eyes darting away from mine as if she couldn't face the truth of what I had just said. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know I'm so sorry." Her apology only made the anger bubble up again. "Sorry doesn't change the fact that you're still thinking about him," I snapped. "Even after everything, he's still there. How am I supposed to move on from this when you can't even let him go in your dreams?" "I don't want him," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't even remember him, Gavin. Please, you have to believe me. I don't know why I said his name." Her tears cut through me like a knife, but I couldn't shake the anger, the hurt. "You don't remember? You don't know? That's always the excuse, isn't it? But it doesn't matter, Julia. It doesn't change what happened. You had an affair. You lied to me. And no matter what you remember or don't remember, it's still there." "I'm trying," she sobbed, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'm trying so hard to make this right. But I can't control my dreams, Gavin. Please don't let this destroy us." I turned away, pacing the length of the kitchen, trying to gather my thoughts. I didn't want to destroy us. I didn't want to lose her. But I couldn't live like this either, trapped in a cycle of doubt, constantly wondering if I would ever be enough for her again. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I said finally, my voice shaking with the weight of the truth. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that we can fix this." Julia's breath hitched, her tears falling faster now. "Please don't say that," she whispered. "Please, Gavin, don't give up on us." But I couldn't look at her. I couldn't face the pain in her eyes, the guilt, the sorrow. I felt like I was drowning, and every attempt to reach the surface only pulled me deeper into the abyss. "I need space," I said, my words barely audible. "I need time to think." She nodded slowly, wiping at her tears. "Okay," she whispered. "Whatever you need. But please don't shut me out completely." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I slept on the couch, avoiding any real conversations with Julia. It was like we were living in two separate worlds, both of us trapped in our own pain, unable to reach out to each other. I took long drives, escaping the house whenever I could, trying to clear my head. But no matter where I went, the weight of everything followed me. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about David, about how Julia had said his name in her sleep. It was a wound that wouldn't heal, no matter how hard I tried to push it aside. One evening, I found myself parked outside a bar, staring at the neon sign flickering in the window. I hadn't been out drinking in a long time, but tonight I needed something to numb the pain, to drown out the noise in my head. I stepped inside, the dim light and the low hum of conversation washing over me like a wave of quiet relief. I ordered a drink, sitting at the bar lost in my thoughts. The alcohol burned as it went down, but it dulled the sharp edges of my mind, numbing the constant ache that had taken up residence in my chest. "Rough night?" the bartender asked, raising an eyebrow as he poured another round. "Something like that," I muttered, staring into the amber liquid. He nodded, not pressing further, and I was grateful for the silence. As the night wore on, I found myself sinking deeper into the haze, the alcohol doing its job of blurring the edges of reality. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, lost in my own world, but eventually, the bar began to empty out, and the weight of everything came crashing back down on me. I paid my tab and stumbled out into the night, the cool air hitting me like a slap to the face. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady myself, my mind spinning from the drinks. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to face Julia, to face the reality of our crumbling marriage. But I had nowhere else to go. When I got back to the house, it was late. The lights were off, and the silence inside was deafening. I made my way to the living room, collapsing onto the couch, my mind still swirling from the alcohol. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I felt the weight of everything pressed down on me. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It all swirled together, mixing with the haze of the alcohol, until I didn't know what was real anymore. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the thoughts, trying to push away the pain. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. The truth was I didn't know how to fix this, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, my mouth dry and bitter from the alcohol. I groaned as I sat up on the couch, rubbing my eyes, the events of the previous night crashing back into my mind like a wave. I had gone out drinking to forget, but it hadn't worked. Nothing could erase the mess my life had become, not even drowning myself in whiskey. I glanced toward the bedroom door, which was still closed. Julia hadn't come out yet, and I didn't know if that was because she was still asleep or because she was giving me space. The house was so quiet, it felt like we were both ghosts, haunting our own home. I stood up, stretching my aching muscles as I made my way to the kitchen. The air was thick with tension, a tension that had been there since the moment I found out about the affair. It clung to everything, every room, every corner. There was no escaping it. I made coffee, the smell filling the room as I stared out the window at the gray sky. It felt like the entire world had dulled, colors muted, sounds distant. Or maybe it was just me, sinking deeper into the numbness that had taken hold. I had pushed Julia away, built a wall between us, but in doing so, I had trapped myself in the silence too. I heard the bedroom door creak open, and a moment later, Julia appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me, her eyes tired, and I could see the weight of everything in her expression, the same weight that was crushing me. "Morning," she said softly, her voice tentative. "Morning," I muttered, not meeting her gaze. She walked into the kitchen, standing a few feet away from me, as if she wasn't sure if she was allowed to come closer. We hadn't spoken much in the past few days, both of us avoiding the inevitable conversation that hung between us like a storm cloud. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice cautious. "You didn't come to bed last night." I shrugged, still staring out the window. "Didn't feel like it." She nodded slowly, her hands wringing together as she tried to find the words. I could see the tension in her body, the way she was holding herself back, afraid to say the wrong thing. We were both walking on eggshells, afraid of the next explosion. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "about what you said about not being able to do this anymore." My stomach tightened, but I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "And I know that I've put you through hell. I've been trying so hard to make things right, but I don't know if that's enough." She paused, her eyes filling with unshed tears as she looked at me. "I don't want to lose you, Gavin. But if you need to walk away, if you need to let go, I'll understand. I don't want to keep hurting you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had been so consumed by my own pain, my own anger, that I hadn't really considered what it would mean to let her go, what it would mean to truly end things. Part of me wanted to take her up on the offer, to walk away, to start over, to escape the weight of everything we had been through. But another part of me, a part one wasn't sure I could ignore, still loved her. Still wanted to believe that we could find a way back to each other. "I don't know what I need," I admitted, my voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again." Julia's breath hitched, a tear slipping down her cheek as she nodded. "I understand," she whispered. "I know that forgiveness isn't something I can ask for. I know that I have to earn it, but I don't want to give up on us. I don't want to give up on you." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Something small, fragile, but real. She had hurt me, yes. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible. But she was still here, fighting for us, fighting for me. And that meant something. But was it enough? I didn't know. I wasn't sure if I could ever let go of the anger, the resentment, the constant fear that she would hurt me again. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to lose her either. "I don't want to make any promises," I said, my voice low. "I don't know if I can give you what you want. But I don't want to walk away yet. Not without trying." Her eyes widened in surprise, more tears spilling over as she stepped closer to me, her hand reaching out tentatively. "You mean it?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't know if it'll work. but I'm willing to try." Julia let out a shaky breath, her relief palpable as she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I stiffened at first, the instinct to pull away still there, but after a moment, I let myself lean into her embrace, the warmth of her body against mine both comforting and unfamiliar. We stood there for a long time, neither of us speaking, just holding onto each other like two people clinging to the edge of a cliff. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, the steady rhythm of it grounding me, pulling me back from the chaos in my mind. "I love you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I love you so much, Gavin." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words sinking in. I didn't know if I could say it back, not yet, but I held her a little tighter, hoping that, for now, that was enough. The days that followed were slow, tentative steps toward something new. Julia and I started talking more, really talking about the affair, about what had happened, about what had gone wrong between us. It wasn't easy. In fact, some of the conversations were painful, raw, but they were necessary. I learned things I hadn't known before, about how she had been feeling in the months leading up to the affair, about the doubts and insecurities she had been grappling with. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it gave me a better understanding of why it had happened. And that, in some strange way, helped. We went back to therapy, too. Dr. Bennett pushed us harder this time, asking us to confront the deeper issues in our marriage, the things that had been broken long before David came into the picture. It was uncomfortable, at times excruciating, but it was also necessary. If we were going to rebuild, we had to tear down the walls we had both put up over the years. But even as we made progress, the doubt still lingered. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my mind racing with thoughts of Julia and him, of the lies she had told, of the trust that had been shattered. And I'd wonder if we were just fooling ourselves, if it was even possible to rebuild something that had been so thoroughly destroyed. One night, after a particularly difficult therapy session, I found myself sitting on the back porch, staring up at the sky, my thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and uncertainty. Julia had gone to bed early, exhausted from the emotional toll of everything, but I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't let me. I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, and a moment later, Julia appeared, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she sat down beside me. We sat in silence for a while, the cool night air wrapping around us like a blanket, the stars twinkling above us. "I know this is hard," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that you're still struggling to trust me, and I don't blame you. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for as long as it takes." I looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something like hope. "I want to believe that," I admitted, my voice quiet. "I want to believe that we can get through this. But sometimes it's hard." Julia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know, and I'm willing to wait, for as long as it takes." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could make it through this. Maybe we could find our way back to each other, one step at a time. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. The next few weeks were a slow, painful journey toward healing. We still had moments of doubt, moments when the weight of everything threatened to pull us under. But we kept talking, kept working through the pain, and little by little, something started to shift. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Julia reached for my hand, her fingers curling around mine. "Do you remember the first time we met?" she asked, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I smiled, nodding. "Yeah, you spilled coffee all over me." She laughed softly, the sound warming something inside me. "I was so embarrassed. I thought for sure you'd never want to see me again." "I didn't mind," I said, squeezing her hand. "I kind of liked you." We shared a quiet laugh, the tension between us easing for the first time in what felt like forever. It was a small moment, a glimpse of the connection we had once shared. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe we could make it through this. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for us after all. The laughter we shared that night on the couch felt like a lifeline. For the first time in what seemed like forever, we found ourselves slipping back into the rhythm of who we once were. It wasn't forced, it wasn't heavy with the weight of the past. It was easy. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself believe that we could really find our way back. But healing isn't a straight path. It's more like a winding road full of sharp turns, detours, and setbacks. Julia and I had spent weeks clawing our way back from the edge of what felt like a bottomless pit. But there were still days where the anger simmered just beneath the surface, where trust felt like an impossible dream. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and everything was better. Far from it. There were still nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the memory of her betrayal gnawing at me, taunting me with images I couldn't shake. Her with him, their secret moments, the lies she had told. I would catch myself wondering if I was fooling myself, if I was trying to hold on to something that was already broken beyond repair. But then there were other days when she'd catch my eye from across the room, a soft smile tugging at her lips, or when she'd lean into me during a movie, her head resting on my shoulder, and I'd remember what it felt like to be in love with her before all of this. And on those days, I thought maybe, just maybe we had a chance. Dr. Bennett had warned us early on that trust was something we would have to rebuild brick by brick. There was no quick fix, no magic solution to undo what had been done. It would take time, more time than either of us could predict. And even then, she said sometimes people didn't make it through. Sometimes the wounds were just too deep. But Julia had been consistent. She had shown up for every therapy session, every hard conversation. She didn't shy away from my anger, even when it would have been easier to avoid it. She listened to me when I needed to vent, when I needed to express just how much her affair had torn me apart. She didn't make excuses for what she'd done, didn't try to justify it. She just apologized again and again and promised to do better. And maybe that's what had kept me from walking away. Her willingness to fight for us, to take responsibility for her mistakes, even when the guilt was clearly crushing her. One evening, as we sat in therapy, Dr. Bennett asked me a question that had been hanging over us for months. Gavin, do you believe that Julia's affair was about you? Do you think it was something you caused? The question caught me off guard. I sat there, staring at the floor, unsure how to answer. I had asked myself that question 100 times since I found out about the affair. Was I not enough for her? Had I done something to push her away, to make her seek comfort in someone else? I don't know. I admitted, my voice heavy. I've wondered if maybe I missed something, if there was something I wasn't giving her that she found with him. Julia's breath hitched beside me, but she didn't speak. Dr. Bennett nodded, giving me the space to continue. I know she said it wasn't about me. I went on, my voice faltering. But it's hard not to feel like I did something wrong, like maybe I wasn't good enough. Julia turned to me then, her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't about you, she whispered, her voice trembling. It was never about you, Gavin. You were more than enough. You've always been enough. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt was still there, clinging to the edges of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. Then why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why did you do it? Julia wiped at her tears, her hands shaking as she tried to gather herself. I don't have a simple answer, she admitted. I was lost. I was scared. I was feeling things I didn't understand, and I didn't know how to deal with them. But it wasn't because of you. You have to believe that. It was my failure, my mistake. I nodded, swallowing hard. It wasn't the first time she had said those words, but somehow, hearing them now, in this room, they hit differently. Maybe because I wanted so badly to believe that the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had shared my life with, wasn't trying to hurt me. Maybe because I needed to believe that. Dr. Bennett leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. Affairs are rarely about the betrayed partner, she said. They're often about unresolved feelings, personal struggles, things that have little to do with the relationship itself. That doesn't make it any less painful, of course. But it's important to recognize that this wasn't your failure, Gavin. It was a choice Julia made, and she's owning that choice. Now, it's about what you both do moving forward. I nodded again, my heart heavy but a little lighter than it had been before. Maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe I didn't have to carry the weight of that guilt anymore. Over the next few weeks, Julia and I continued to rebuild, slowly, carefully, one step at a time. The therapy sessions helped, but so did the small moments of connection we started to rediscover, like cooking dinner together in the evenings, or going for walks around the neighborhood, or sitting on the porch at night just talking. We weren't back to where we had been before, but we were moving in the right direction. One afternoon, I came home from work to find Julia in the backyard, planting flowers in the garden. I stood there for a moment, watching her as she worked, her hair pulled back, her hands covered in dirt. It was such a simple scene, but it made something stir inside me, something that felt like hope. I walked over to her, crouching down beside her in the garden. "Need some help?" I asked, smiling softly. She looked up at me, surprised but grateful, and nodded. "I'd love that." We spent the next hour working side by side, planting flowers, pulling weeds, talking about nothing and everything. It felt normal, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the past hanging over us. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch, sipping on iced tea, Julia turned to me, her eyes soft and full of emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For giving us a chance," she whispered. "For not giving up on me." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could see the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had married. There was still pain between us, still wounds that would take time to heal, but there was also something else, something stronger, something worth fighting for. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady. "We're in this together." She smiled through her tears, reaching for my hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. We were in this together. It wasn't going to be easy. We still had a long road ahead of us, and I knew there would be more tough conversations, more moments of doubt. But we had made it this far, and as long as we kept showing up for each other, kept fighting for what we had, I believed we could make it. We sat there on the porch, the evening breeze rustling through the trees, the sky slowly turning to dusk. And in that quiet moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt hope. It took us months, months of therapy, months of hard conversations, months of rebuilding trust one step at a time, but eventually, Julia and I found our way back to each other. The affair would always be a part of our story, a painful chapter that had changed us both. But it didn't define us. We learned how to talk again, how to be honest with each other, how to show up for each other even when it was hard. We learned that love wasn't always enough on its own. It took work, it took forgiveness, it took a willingness to face the hard stuff head on. And we did, together. I won't lie and say that everything is perfect now. There are still days when the old doubts creep in, when the memories of what happened resurface. But we've learned how to handle them. We've learned that it's okay to have bad days, as long as we keep moving forward, as long as we keep choosing each other. And every day, I wake up and choose her. I choose us, because even after everything, I still love her. And in the end, that love was worth fighting for.